51 ore cars, each with a payload of around 95 tonnes, were reduced to a mass of twilt iron ore in a derailment 30 kilometres south of Port Hedland on Mount Newman's Newman to Hedland line. The time, 1:17 a.m. on Wednesday, 1980. The early morning light revealed only too clearly the result of the impact. Cars against cars, wheels against rails. 400 metres of track was torn up, with the 51 most severely damaged cars stacked up along 100 metres. The cars had climbed over each other, carried forward further 86 loaded cars, all up weight nearly 10,500 tonnes, pushing behind. They came to rest up to 3 deep, their components haphazardly amongst ore and other railroad hardware. The track itself had bowed under the strain. The rail between the pile-up and the leading cars was twisted and bent. The second in the string of 3 locomotives was found to have its leading bogies off the rails. This led investigators to the theory that the axle of the leading bogie had broken, allowing the offside wheel to drop inside the gauge face of the rail. Evidence to support the theory that something had gone wrong long before the 30-kilometre point was obvious at each road crossing north of the 91.3 crossing. Damage from that point was consistent with the wheel not tracking properly. However, it took the open switch at the number 1 quarry turnout, 30 kilometres south of Hedland, to trigger the pile-up. It is believed that when the offending wheel hit the open switch, it set up a violent rocking motion in the locomotives, which in turn caused broken rails in the turnout area. The broken rails were battered by the 7 ore cars immediately behind the locomotives, setting the scene for the mass derailment. Galen Nisic, superintendent of the permanent way, supervised the clean-up and repair operations. Heavy equipment was called in from Mount Newman's port operations in the shape of 2 D9 bulldozers and 2 front-end loaders. A railroad bulldozer was close at hand, working on the access road at the 45-kilometre post. This was moved up to assist in the clean-up. Initial clean-up efforts were made more inconvenient because the ore cars were loaded. Bulldozers had to tip the wagons over to spill out the ore before rolling each car out of the way to allow work to begin on the track. The cars had to be separated, and in some cases this meant cutting them apart. The main concern was to push aside the debris as quickly as possible to clear the way for a new track to be established, reopening the line to production traffic. Some consolation for the men working to put the railroad back into shape was the fact that the 51 wrecked cars had come to rest within a short distance of each other, leaving the remaining 300 metres of track free of heavy debris. In this section, we cut the damaged rail into handleable lengths and moved clear of the track area. 200 metres of badly twisted rail had torn the fastenings from the sleeper, ripping out the spikes and splitting the sleepers. While clean-up work continued on the mound of ore cars, new track was being prepared. Old sleepers were pulled out, and new sleepers delivered from the store near South Hedland. Meanwhile, the steel train, with new rail on board, was on its way. Sleepers, nearly 1,000 of them, were plated in readiness while the formation was still being levelled to take the new track. In place, the rail was dropped onto the base plates with a pettibone crane. 800 metres of 132-pound rail was required. Men from the Hedland gang, the Port gang, the Earthworks gang and Yandy and Redmont line camps were involved in rebuilding the displaced section of line and removing the wreckage. They worked in 12-hour shifts, maintaining a round-the-clock schedule. The ore cars and debris were finally cleared from the scene by 9 p.m. on the Wednesday night. Construction work on the new track continued until the next morning. While this work was in progress, the wrecked cars were lined up out of the way. Maybe a dozen would be recoverable, the rest to be scrapped, after as many components as possible were salvaged for use elsewhere. The track was re-established in skeletal form, that is, just sleepers and rails, and the track lined and levelled by hand. This work was completed for the first train, loaded, to move onto the repaired section at 9:45 a.m. on the Thursday, just 32 hours and 28 minutes after the derailment had occurred. The first train had to move very slowly. The new track was fragile by normal standards, and Dixie Stephen, in charge of rebuilding the track, watched anxiously, checking that there was sufficient support for the train. The train itself served to consolidate the track. Then, a continuous process of lifting, ballasting and aligning would continue, while a speed restriction of 24 kilometres an hour was applied to the new section. Once it was brought to the required strength and correct alignment, the speed restriction could be lifted. The people whose contributions enabled the track to be came from a wide range of departments, making this a full team effort, like the security staff who kept sightseers out of the way, first aid attendants, and people who ensured that stores, equipment and refreshments kept coming, and many more. And of course, the men of the permanent way. The switch to the quarry is no more. The old quarry loading dock stands a little forlorn, along with the 30-kilometre marker peg. But with the first train through and Mount Newman's operations back to normal, it was a job well done, quickly and professionally.